The investigations into the mysterious execution of Charlie Kirk continue. Recently, shocking news shook the entire internet. An alleged FBI discovery would have revealed who was the real killer of Kirk. But is that true or just another conspiracy theory? Let's understand everything now. Charlie Kirk was standing before a crowd when his life was cut short abruptly. A precise shot, fired from a point still surrounded by doubts, turned an ordinary night into an episode that would become one of the most controversial investigations of the last decade. Within hours, the name of a previously unknown young man, Tyler Robinson, was spread as the sole perpetrator. But the more one looks into the backstage of this case, the more questions arise. The official version seems too clear, too quick, almost convenient. And it is in this void of answers that theories and speculations began to grow, raising the possibility that Robinson was not, in fact, the man behind the trigger. To understand why this case still sparks heated debates, it is first necessary to grasp who Charlie Kirk was. Founder of one of the most influential organizations in the conservative movement, he was just over 30 years old, yet already carried a rare political weight for someone of his age. Admired by some, criticized by others, Kirk was seen as a polarizing figure. His speeches filled auditoriums, his comments generated headlines, and his alliances put him in direct contact with businessmen, politicians, and even foreign leaders. This level of influence made him not just a public figure, but also a potential target for enemies and rivals. The night of his death followed the pattern of so many other presentations he used to give. The audience was excited, cameras rolling, and the expectation was for yet another speech full of energy. But within seconds, the scene turned into chaos. The shot broke the silence and left everyone stunned. The rush, the screams, and the confusion formed a typical scene of a live tragedy. When the authorities arrived, the outcome was already sealed. Charlie Kirk did not survive the wound. And quickly, the narrative took shape. According to the first investigations, a young man named Tyler Robinson had been seen nearby, acting suspiciously. Authorities claimed that traces linked him to the exact spot of the shot. A gun found in still obscure circumstances was tied to him, and the following hours were enough to make him the main and only suspect. But it is precisely there that the doubts begin. For many keen observers, the case seems to have followed a path far too rushed. Robinson was presented to the public almost as a piece already fitted into a puzzle that, in practice, was not complete. The first inconsistency lies in the reaction time. In less than a day, there was an official narrative ready, with a name, face, and alleged technical evidence. For a case of such complexity, this speed caught the attention of independent journalists, security experts, and even people close to Kirk. Another point that raises questions is Robinson's profile. Described as a reserved young man, with no history of violence or involvement in politics, he did not seem to have a clear motive for such a calculated act. The idea that he was just a lone wolf did not convince everyone. Critics of this version point out that in similar cases, investigations usually uncover some kind of manifesto, radical statements, or record that justifies such an action. In Robinson's case, none of that appeared. Only silence and a past without major records. In addition, there are conflicting reports about his exact location during the shot. Some witnesses say they saw him near the area indicated as the firing point, but others claim he was seen in different places, without direct visual access to the stage. This divergence fuels speculation even more. After all, if Robinson did not have the necessary line of sight, how could he have fired the fatal shot? Another aspect that creates controversy is the very weapon tied to him. Experts who analyzed public reports state that there are technical gaps in how the connection was made. The bullet's trajectory, the caliber, and the condition of the projectile were not released in detail, leaving room for legitimate doubts. In high-profile cases, there are usually transparent reports, but in this episode, the information seems to have been kept secret or presented in a fragmented way. The result is fertile ground for alternative hypotheses. As days went by, independent investigations began circulating. Journalists, security analysts, and even academic groups tried to assemble parallel lines of inquiry. Some pointed to the possibility that Robinson had been used as a scapegoat, someone placed at the center of attention to quickly close a case that threatened to create political instability and greater questions. Others raised the hypothesis of multiple shooters, an idea already known in historical conspiracies, but which here gains strength precisely due to the lack of official transparency. The political backstage also enters this equation. Charlie Kirk was not just a commentator. He had contacts with powerful funders, maintained a network of influence inside and outside the United States, and accumulated adversaries on several fronts. Theories suggest that, in the months leading up to his death, Kirk had been distancing himself from certain support groups, revising alliances and even questioning internal practices in his organization. These moves could have generated enough friction to spark resentments, and in an extreme scenario, even hidden motives to silence him. None of this is proven, but the combination of rumors, contradictions, and official silence creates an environment where every detail gains weight. And it is precisely in this tangle of uncertainties that the name of Tyler Robinson continues to be debated. For some, he was the direct perpetrator, a young man who, for reasons still not fully revealed, decided to act against Kirk. For others, he was just a piece placed under the spotlight, someone conveniently tied to the crime while the real gears moved behind the scenes. What is fact is that, to this day, there are more questions than answers. And when we analyze Charlie Kirk's final hours and the first moments of the investigation, an even more disturbing question arises. If Robinson did not pull the trigger, then who was really behind the execution that paralyzed the country and exposed cracks in one of the most influential political movements of today? If the official version leaves so many gaps, the big question is, who would have the resources, the motivation, and the coldness needed to orchestrate the assassination of Charlie Kirk? This question opens the way for a tangle of theories ranging from financial intrigues to international political pressures. It is not about stating absolute truths, but about looking at the inconsistencies that many prefer to ignore. One of the most debated points among independent investigators is the alleged role of Tyler Robinson as an involuntary accomplice. According to this line of reasoning, Robinson could have been convinced to carry a gun to the event without understanding the true purpose of his presence. That would explain why his DNA was on the trigger of the weapon found, but at the same time there is no clear footage of him firing the fatal shot. For those who defend this hypothesis, Robinson was not the shooter, but rather a disposable piece in a much bigger game. And this game would have taken place in the political and financial backstage that surrounded Charlie Kirk in the months before his death. Reports suggest that the conservative leader had been facing increasingly intense pressure from major funders and donors, who wanted to ensure total alignment with their agendas. Some of these meetings, described as real interventions, placed Kirk before ultimatums. Either he maintained certain positions, or he would lose a fundamental part of the resources that sustained his organization. Here comes a disturbing detail. Just days before his death, Kirk was reportedly organizing an internal financial audit of his institution. This audit, according to reports, could expose serious irregularities in the use of million-dollar donations, even raising the suspicion that the money was not being used only for public activities, but also for parallel interests. If that is true, Kirk represented not only a political threat to his ideological enemies, but also to those who financially benefited from his structure. But the theories do not stop there. Another point of speculation comes from the international field. Charlie Kirk was a figure of global influence and did not hide his criticism of certain policies of foreign allies. In particular, he reportedly showed discomfort with the weight that certain funders linked to external interests exerted over the American conservative movement. This gradual distancing from supports considered untouchable may have isolated Kirk, leaving him vulnerable. What draws attention is that, after his death, some of these donors who were on a collision course with him changed their stance and returned to support his institution as if nothing had happened. Coincidence or calculation? Parallel to this, strange reports emerged about the spiritual side of the story. 2 weeks before the assassination, blogs and alternative outlets claimed that radical groups were trying to cast curses against Kirk. For many, this is nothing more than modern folklore, but people close to him said that both Charlie and his wife took the threat seriously, even seeking religious counseling. In a deeply divided country, even this symbolic detail fueled the atmosphere of conspiracy further. What stands out is that, while the public was divided between believing or not these narratives, the official reaction followed a curious pattern. Shortly after the tragedy, figures of great political power and even international leaders felt the need to deny any involvement, even without having been directly accused. For some analysts, this type of public reaction is, in itself, suspicious. After all, when was the last time a death on American soil made foreign authorities repeatedly speak out, as if trying to shield themselves from something? Meanwhile, in the mainstream press, a real offensive began against those who questioned the official version. Candace Owens, one of Kirk's closest friends and partners, was heavily attacked. Magazines and TV programs began spreading the idea that she had been distant from Kirk and had no legitimacy to speak about the case. But documents, photos and event records showed the opposite. The two had been together on tours and maintained constant contact. The narrative of isolation seemed more like an attempt to discredit her than a faithful portrait of reality. This coordinated effort to manipulate the narrative raised another suspicion. Someone might have been trying to cover up inconvenient aspects of the case. After all, if it was just an isolated crime, committed by an unstable young man, why such a strong need to control the public discourse? Why discredit so forcefully those who raised legitimate questions? The FBI, pressured by the wave of speculation, announced that it would investigate alternative theories, including the possibility of accomplices or tampering with evidence. It was a momentary victory for those demanding answers, but it also laid bare a dilemma. If even the largest investigative agency in the United States must bow to popular pressure to reopen paths, how much can we trust the first version presented as definitive? However, while some see in the investigation by Owens and other independent journalists a necessary search for truth, others accuse her of fueling dangerous divisions in an already polarized country. Kirk's widow, Erica, followed a completely different line, choosing to emphasize forgiveness and faith in her public farewell. This contrast between the pursuit of justice and the choice of serenity revealed an even greater fracture in the conservative movement. How to deal with political violence without getting lost in the labyrinth of conspiracy theories. In the end, the Charlie Kirk case turned into much more than an isolated tragedy. It opened space to discuss how far donors and external interests control the American political discourse. It highlighted the weakening of trust in institutions and showed how every part of society interprets the same facts in radically different ways. For some, Kirk was the victim of a disturbed young man who acted alone. For others, he was eliminated as part of a mechanism that mixes power, money, and silence. And although it sounds very striking, there is no official record that the FBI ever spoke publicly about the case.